My parents gifted my sister a mansion, then handed me the debt. You owe us your salary. I refused, so they sued me for $500,000. Until the judge saw the truth. I used to believe that family was supposed to be your safe harbor. You know the cliché. The people who are supposed to have your back when the rest of the world turns cold, the ones who celebrate your victories and cushion your falls. I carried that belief like a shield for 29 years. I really did. I am Avery, a 29-year-old woman who has spent the entirety of her adult life playing by the rules. And when I say playing by the rules, I mean I exhausted myself trying to be the perfect daughter, the reliable one, the human safety net. I work as a senior analyst at a corporate firm, a job that requires me to be in the office by 8 in the morning and often keeps me tethered to my desk until well past 8 at night. I clawed my way up the corporate ladder. Nobody handed me anything. I took out student loans, I lived on cheap instant noodles for 4 years, and I built my credit score from nothing. I did everything you are supposed to do to secure a stable future. But in my family, stability wasn't viewed as a personal achievement. It was viewed as a communal resource. And that brings me to my younger sister, Riley. Riley is 26 years old, but if you observed her life, you would think she was a teenager on a permanent summer vacation. Riley is what psychologists might call the golden child, but I just call her the emotional black hole of our family. She is charming, loud, and entirely devoid of personal responsibility. While I was pulling double shifts to pay off my college debt, Riley was dropping out of her 3rd university program because the professors didn't understand her creative vision. When I bought my first used car, a beat-up sedan with peeling paint, my parents, Caroline and Wyatt, bought Riley a brand new SUV because they didn't want her driving something unsafe. I never complained. I swallowed the bitterness, telling myself that our paths were just different. But the favoritism wasn't just about gifts. It was a deeply ingrained, toxic ecology. My parents had this twisted microeconomic system in their heads where my success was somehow a tax that I owed to cover Riley's failures. 2 years ago, Riley maxed out 3 different credit cards. She had quit her job as a receptionist because she claimed the fluorescent lighting was giving her bad energy. She had 0 income and thousands of dollars in debt. I remember the phone call vividly. My mother, Caroline, called me weeping. She didn't ask me for help. She demanded it wrapped in tears. She told me that Riley's credit was going to be ruined, that she wouldn't be able to rent an apartment, that her life would be over before it began. And then came the hook. She told me that since I had just gotten a promotion, it was only fair that I helped my sister out. I argued, I fought, but the guilt they piled on me was suffocating. They made me feel like an absolute monster for having money in my savings account while my sister suffered. So I caved. I drained my emergency fund to pay off her cards. I didn't get a thank you from Riley. She just posted a photo online the next day, holding a $6 iced coffee, talking about how the universe always provides. I promised myself I would never do it again. I drew a hard line in the sand. I thought I had made it clear that I was no longer the family ATM. But I underestimated the delusion of my parents. I underestimated how far they were willing to go to protect the golden child. I didn't realize that in their minds, I wasn't an independent adult with my own life, my own goals, and my own future. To Caroline and Wyatt, I was just a walking, talking bank account that they had produced, and therefore, they felt entitled to withdraw from it whenever they saw fit. They didn't see my hard work, they only saw the results of it, and they decided that those results belonged to the family. The realization of how deeply flawed their love for me didn't happen overnight. It was a slow poisoning, a gradual wearing down of my boundaries until the final, catastrophic blow. I thought paying off a credit card was the worst of it. I had no idea that they were planning something so legally and morally bankrupt that it would shatter our family into pieces. They were preparing to sacrifice my entire financial existence just so Riley could play house, and they were going to do it with a smile on their faces. Looking back, the signs were there. Predators don't just strike out of nowhere. They stalk, they study, and they wait for the perfect moment to breach your defenses. For Caroline and Wyatt, that moment happened exactly 1 month before my life exploded. It was a Sunday afternoon. They called and said they were in my neighborhood and wanted to drop by to see my new apartment. I had just moved into a nice, quiet complex closer to my office. It was the first place I had ever lived in that felt truly mine. I had decorated it with care, buying furniture that wasn't secondhand, making it my sanctuary away from the chaos of the world. I let them in. I made coffee. We sat in the living room, and everything felt completely normal. It felt like a regular family visit. Caroline was complimenting my curtains, asking me about my job, playing the role of the proud, supportive mother. Wyatt was sitting on the couch, watching a sports game on my television, making small talk about the weather and my commute. I let my guard down. I actually felt a warm sense of comfort, thinking maybe we were finally turning a corner, maybe we could just be a normal family for an afternoon. Then, the distraction happened. It was orchestrated so perfectly that I didn't question it until months later. Caroline reached for her mug of hazelnut coffee and somehow managed to knock the entire thing over. Dark brown liquid spilled all over my pristine, light gray area rug. Caroline immediately started gasping and apologizing profusely. She jumped up, fluttering her hands, acting like she had just committed a terrible crime. "Oh my goodness, Avery, I am so clumsy. Quick, get the paper towels, get the carpet cleaner. We need to scrub this before it sets," she panicked, her voice high-pitched and frantic. I rushed to the kitchen to grab cleaning supplies. Caroline followed me, talking non-stop, completely monopolizing my attention. She kept getting in my way, supposedly trying to help, but actually just keeping me contained in the kitchen and the living room area. In the middle of all this orchestrated chaos, Wyatt quietly stood up and said he needed to use the restroom. He walked down the hallway. My apartment has a simple layout. The hallway leads to the bathroom, but right next to the bathroom is my home office. It's where I keep my filing cabinet, my work computer, and a stack of important documents I had been organizing for tax season. I was on my hands and knees, frantically scrubbing the rug with Caroline hovering over me, chattering away. Wyatt was gone for a solid 20 minutes. You don't take 20 minutes to just wash your hands. But I was so distracted by the stain and my mother's continuous stream of apologies that I didn't process the timeline. When Wyatt finally emerged, he looked completely calm. He sat back down, finished the rest of the visit, and then they left, hugging me at the door and telling me they loved me. It wasn't until the lawsuit hit that the sickening truth clicked into place. Wyatt didn't have an upset stomach. He had walked past the bathroom and stepped right into my home office. My filing cabinet was unlocked because I had been working on my taxes the night before. While I was scrubbing coffee out of a rug, my own father was systematically going through my personal files. He took his smartphone and photographed everything. He took pictures of my W-2 forms, detailing my exact annual salary. He photographed my recent pay stubs. And most devastatingly, he found my Social Security card and snapped a clear, high-resolution photo of it. They needed my financial footprint, and they came into my home under the guise of parental love to steal it. They sat on my couch, drank my coffee, and smiled in my face while secretly harvesting my identity. The level of premeditation is what still keeps me awake at night. It wasn't a crime of passion or a spur-of-the-moment mistake. It was a calculated, cold-blooded infiltration. They treated my home not as their daughter's sanctuary, but as a target for a heist. They used my mother's fake clumsiness as a smokescreen so my father could commit identity theft. And the worst part? When they hugged me goodbye at the door, they already knew they were going to use those photos to chain me to $500,000 of debt. They kissed my cheek knowing they were about to ruin my life, and they didn't lose a single second of sleep over it. The trap finally snapped shut exactly 4 weeks after the apartment visit. It was a Tuesday evening. Caroline had called me the day before, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, insisting I come over for dinner. She said they had some incredibly exciting family news to share, and they wanted me to be the first to know. I was exhausted from work. I had been staring at spreadsheets for 10 hours, my eyes burned, and all I wanted to do was go home and sleep. But the guilt conditioning runs deep. You don't say no to a family dinner when your mother uses that specific, hopeful tone. So, I drove to their house. I walked into a scene that felt like a staged photograph. The dining room table was set with the good china. The smell of pot roast filled the air. Riley was sitting there, practically vibrating with excitement, holding hands with her fiancé, Carter. Carter is a 28-year-old aspiring musician who works exactly 12 hours a week at a record store. He is just as allergic to responsibility as Riley is. Wyatt was pouring wine, and Caroline was beaming. They sat me down, poured me a glass, and we went through the motions of dinner. I was too tired to engage much, just nodding along as Riley talked about how she and Carter were ready to start their real lives. After dessert, the atmosphere shifted. Wyatt cleared his throat, a self-important sound, and reached into his briefcase resting next to his chair. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope and placed it on the table in front of me. Caroline clasped her hands together, looking at me with wide, expectant eyes. "Avery," Wyatt started, his voice adopting a formal, businesslike tone. "You know we've always admired how responsible you are. How hard you work. You are the stable one in this family. And, because we trust you, we want you to be part of this huge milestone." I frowned, looking at the envelope. "What is this?" I asked, my fingers brushing the thick paper. "Just open it, open it." Riley squealed, bouncing in her seat. I opened the clasp and slid the documents out. They were legal papers, densely packed with fine print and official seals. My eyes immediately scanned the top page. It was a property deed and a mortgage agreement. I saw the address of a house in a very upscale, expensive neighborhood on the other side of town. Then I saw the purchase price, $480,000. My brain struggled to process what I was looking at. I saw Riley's name listed as the primary title holder. Okay, I thought, somehow they bought Riley a house. A mansion, really. But then I flipped to the loan agreement. My heart stopped. The blood rushed out of my face, leaving me cold and lightheaded. Right there, under primary borrower, printed in bold, undeniable letters, was my name. Avery. Not Wyatt. Not Caroline. Not Riley. Me. I stared at the paper for what felt like an eternity. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the rushing of blood in my ears. I looked up. My parents were sitting there, watching my reaction, sipping their wine as if we were discussing the weather. Riley was grinning from ear to ear. "I don't understand," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. I tried to keep my tone calm, thinking this had to be a typo, a massive clerical error. Why is my name on the mortgage for Riley's house? Why am I listed as the primary borrower for a loan of nearly $500,000? Caroline smiled, a sickeningly sweet expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, honey, we found the perfect house for Riley and Carter. But you know Riley's credit isn't great right now and Carter is still building his career. The bank wouldn't approve them. But your credit is fantastic, Avery. You have that high-paying job, you have no dependents. The broker said you qualify perfectly. So, we put the loan in your name." I blinked, waiting for the punchline. "You put a $480,000 loan in my name? Who is supposed to pay for this?" Wyatt waved his hand dismissively, as if I had asked a stupid question. "You are, of course. Just for a few years. Riley and Carter will move in, and you'll cover the monthly payments until they get on their feet. It just makes sense, Avery. You make more than enough. It's an investment in your sister's future." The sheer audacity hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just angry, I was profoundly horrified. "You are out of your minds," I said, dropping the papers onto the table as if they were infected. "I am not signing this. I am not paying for a mansion for Riley while I live in an apartment. Absolutely not. This is insane." That was the exact moment the mask slipped. The loving family illusion shattered instantly. Caroline's face twisted into an ugly, furious snarl. Her voice dropped an octave, turning cold and venomous. She leaned across the table and pointed a manicured finger at my face. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat," she hissed. "You owe us your salary for everything we sacrificed to raise you. We clothed you, we fed you, and now that your sister needs you, you turn your back on her." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I owe you nothing. You stole my information. You ran my credit without my permission. This is fraud. Wyatt stood up too, his face red. Don't you dare use that word in this house. The pre-approvals are already processed, Avery. We used the forms you gave us. You're doing this, or you are dead to this family. I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked out the front door, and got into my car. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. I drove away into the night, knowing my life would never be the same again. In the movies, when you walk out on a toxic situation, there is usually a dramatic soundtrack and a sense of immediate liberation. In real life, there is just an overwhelming, nauseating silence, followed by a coordinated psychological assault. The morning after the dinner, the barrage began. It started with my phone buzzing incessantly on my desk at work. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my spreadsheets, but the notifications kept piling up like a digital avalanche. Caroline was the general of this war, and she deployed her troops with terrifying efficiency. She didn't text me directly to argue the legality of what she did. That would leave a paper trail of her admitting to fraud. Instead, she utilized the extended family as her personal attack dogs. By noon, I had received a massive paragraph from my Aunt Susan. It read, "Avery, I am so disappointed in you. Your mother called me crying her eyes out. She said you promised to help Riley secure a home for her and Carter, and now you are backing out just to be spiteful. Family is everything. You need to stop being so selfish and honor your commitments." I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. Promised? I never promised anything. Caroline had completely fabricated a narrative where I was the instigator, the one who offered the moon and then cruelly snatched it away. She was weaponizing my relatives' ignorance. Then came the messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. "Wow, didn't know you cared so much about money over your own blood," one wrote. "Hope you enjoy living alone in your apartment while your sister struggles," said another. They were trying to isolate me, to make me feel so utterly hated and alienated that I would break down and sign the papers just to make the pain stop. This is how gaslighting works on a communal level. When enough people tell you that you are the villain, your brain starts to short-circuit. You start to question your own sanity. I sat in a bathroom stall at work, crying silently, wondering if maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I was the bad person. But then, Riley escalated things. She took the campaign public. Riley is obsessed with social media, treating her life like a reality television show where she is always the tragic heroine. That evening, she posted a video online. She didn't mention me by name, but she didn't have to. The video showed her sitting in her car, wiping away perfectly timed tears. "I am just so broken today," Riley said to the camera, her voice trembling. "Carter and I thought we finally had our dream home. We were so close to starting our forever. But someone we trusted, someone who is supposed to love me unconditionally, decided to destroy that dream out of pure jealousy. It just hurts so much to know that money is more important to some people than family." The comments flooded in. Hundreds of people validating her, sending her prayers, and throwing digital stones at the jealous, toxic person who ruined her life. She tagged Carter, she tagged my parents, she tagged cousins. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She was painting herself as the victim of a vicious betrayal, completely ignoring the fact that the dream home was a $500,000 financial trap set illegally in my name. The anger that had been simmering inside me suddenly boiled over, vaporizing the guilt. I saw clearly what they were doing. They weren't trying to reason with me. They were trying to break my spirit. They wanted me compliant. They wanted me docile. I realized that responding to their texts, trying to defend myself to flying monkeys who had already made up their minds, was useless. It would only give them more ammunition. So, I did the only thing I could do. I went completely dark. I didn't block them immediately because I knew I needed to preserve evidence. I turned off my notifications. I created a specific folder on my computer. Every guilt-tripping text, every manipulative email from Caroline, every passive-aggressive post from Riley, I screenshotted all of it. I backed it up to a cloud server. I documented every single piece of psychological warfare they threw at me. I wasn't just a daughter being bullied anymore. I was a hostage gathering intelligence. I spent the next 3 weeks living in a state of hypervigilance, jumping every time my doorbell rang, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew they wouldn't just let a $480,000 house slip away without a fight. But even in my darkest paranoia, I never could have predicted the sheer, breathtaking audacity of their next move. 3 weeks of suffocating silence followed the initial explosion of the smear campaign. The texts from aunts and cousins slowly dwindled. Riley's social media shifted back to posting pictures of overpriced lattes. I cautiously began to let my guard down. I told myself that they had finally realized I wasn't going to break. I assumed the bank had denied the final approval without my physical signature. The deal for the mansion had fallen through, and my parents were just licking their wounds in silence. I was foolish enough to believe that blood, even toxic blood, had a fundamental limit. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was working from home, wearing sweatpants, completely immersed in a quarterly financial report. The doorbell rang. It was sharp and unexpected. I wasn't expecting any packages. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a plain polo shirt holding a clipboard. Thinking it was a delivery requiring a signature, I opened the door. "Avery?" the man asked, his tone neutral. "Yes, that's me," I replied. He thrust a thick stack of papers into my chest. "You've been served," he said flatly, turning around and walking briskly down the hallway before I could even process the words. I stood in my doorway, holding the heavy packet. My hands started to tremble instinctively. I closed the door, walked to my kitchen island, and placed the documents under the bright overhead lights. The front page was a standard legal cover sheet from the county civil court. My eyes scanned down to the parties involved. Plaintiffs: Wyatt and Caroline. Defendant: Avery. The breath was knocked completely out of my lungs. I physically stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the counter to keep from falling. I felt a wave of intense nausea wash over me. My parents, my own flesh and blood, the people who brought me into this world, were suing me. I forced myself to read the complaint. The legal jargon was dense, but the narrative they had constructed was clear and absolutely terrifying. Wyatt and Caroline were suing me for breach of verbal contract and promissory estoppel. The document claimed that I had explicitly and repeatedly promised to finance the purchase of the property for my sister. It stated that based on my solid, verbal commitment, my parents had put down a non-refundable earnest money deposit of $50,000 out of their own retirement savings. But it got worse. The lawsuit alleged that on a specific Tuesday evening, they even listed the exact date, I had come to their house, verbally confirmed the agreement in front of witnesses, and authorized them to use my financial information to secure the loan. They claimed that my sudden, malicious refusal to sign the final closing documents had caused the entire deal to collapse. Because of my spiteful withdrawal, they had lost their $50,000 deposit, and Riley had suffered severe emotional distress. They were seeking $500,000 in total damages. I stood in my kitchen, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their lie. They had taken my refusal to be a victim of fraud and spun it into a civil lawsuit where I was the perpetrator. They were trying to bankrupt me through the legal system. The $50,000 deposit detail made me sick. I knew my parents didn't have that kind of liquid cash. They must have taken out a second mortgage on their own home just to secure Riley's mansion, banking entirely on forcing me to pay the monthly installments. When I refused, they lost their money, and instead of taking responsibility for their reckless gamble, they decided to destroy me to get it back. The emotional devastation of holding those papers is something I will never fully recover from. A lawsuit is a declaration of war. It is a public, documented attempt to dismantle someone's life. To see my parents' names listed as the plaintiffs seeking my financial ruin was the final, brutal severing of our bond. I realized then that they didn't see me as a human being. I was an obstacle. I was a rebellious asset that needed to be punished and liquidated. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up weeks ago. Instead, a cold, absolute clarity settled over my mind. They had crossed the Rubicon. They had escalated this from family drama to a legal blood sport. They assumed I would be terrified of the court system, that I would cower under the threat of a massive judgment and settle the case by just agreeing to buy the house. They bet everything on my lifelong habit of obedience. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot that I am an analyst. My entire career is built on finding discrepancies, tracking data, and proving facts. They wanted a war based on a fabricated timeline. I was going to give them an execution based on reality. I picked up my phone and started searching for the most ruthless defense attorney in the city. Finding the right lawyer wasn't about finding someone to mediate a family dispute. I needed an architect of destruction. I hired a man named Gregory, a defense attorney who specialized in civil fraud and had a reputation for shredding plaintiffs in the courtroom. I sat in his high-rise office the next morning, dropping the thick stack of court documents onto his glass desk, followed by my own meticulously organized binder of evidence. Gregory read through the complaint, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and looked at me. Your parents are claiming a breach of verbal contract. Verbal contracts are notoriously hard to prove, but they're claiming they have witnesses. Namely, your sister's fiancé, who they say was present when you allegedly made this promise at their house on the evening of Tuesday, October 12th, at exactly 6 in the evening. They are banking on his testimony to establish promissory estoppel. I felt a dark, vindictive smile pull at the corners of my mouth. The sheer arrogance of my father was going to be his undoing. Wyatt, in his attempt to make the lawsuit look ironclad, had been too specific. He had locked himself into a precise timeline, likely choosing that Tuesday because it was the day before the mortgage broker submitted the final hard credit pull. Gregory, I said, my voice steady and cold. My parents are lazy liars. They chose a Tuesday because they assumed I would just be coming home from work. They didn't account for quarter-end reporting. I opened my binder and slid a series of documents across the desk. My corporate office is located exactly 50 miles away from my parents' house. The traffic on that specific highway during rush hour makes it a minimum 90-minute drive. Gregory raised an eyebrow, picking up the papers. That first document is a certified printout from my company's security system, I explained, pointing to the highlighted rows. It records every time my keycard is swiped. As you can see, on Tuesday, October 12th, I badged into the building at 8 in the morning. The exit swipe shows I did not leave the building until 8:30 at night. Gregory's eyes widened slightly as he traced the timestamps. Okay, security logs are strong. But is it possible someone else used your badge? I slid the next piece of evidence forward. Unlikely. But just in case, look at this second document. That is a time-stamped, itemized receipt from the corporate cafeteria located on the 4th floor of my building. At exactly 6:15 in the evening, 15 minutes after my parents' claim I was sitting in their living room making a verbal contract, I was purchasing a turkey sandwich and a bottle of sparkling water. The receipt was paid using my personal credit card. I watched as the pieces clicked together in the lawyer's mind. The 50-mile defense. It was a physical, spatial impossibility for me to have been at my parents' house at 6 in the evening. I had a digital footprint anchoring me to a building 50 miles away. But wait, there's more, I said, sliding the final set of documents over. This was the result of my paranoia after the dinner. I pulled my credit report immediately after I walked out of their house. The hard inquiry for the mortgage happened on Wednesday morning. But the pre-approval process requires a phone verification. I contacted the broker and demanded the file. They provided the phone number that was used to verbally confirm my identity and employment details. Gregory looked at the number. This isn't your cell phone number. No, it isn't, I replied. It's a prepaid burner phone. I did some digging. My father, in his infinite wisdom, bought that prepaid phone at a local electronics store. I have a bank statement showing a charge from that exact store on his shared credit card with my mother, 2 days before the broker was called. My mother impersonated me on a burner phone to authorize the credit check. Gregory set the papers down and looked at me, a sharp, predatory grin forming on his face. Avery, your parents didn't just file a frivolous lawsuit. By forging your signature on the pre-approval documents and using a burner phone to impersonate you to a financial institution, they have committed wire fraud, identity theft, and attempted mortgage fraud. And now, they have submitted a sworn legal complaint to a judge based on a timeline that is demonstrably, mathematically impossible. I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the past month begin to lift, replaced by an icy, absolute resolve. I wasn't just going to win this lawsuit. I was going to let my parents walk into that courtroom, swear an oath on a Bible, and then I was going to drop the digital guillotine on their necks. We don't settle, I told Gregory, closing my empty binder. We don't warn them. We let them take the stand. We let them lie to the judge. And then, we destroy them. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. The morning of the court hearing was gray and freezing, which felt entirely appropriate for what was about to happen. I walked into the county courthouse wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit. I didn't want to look like a victim. I wanted to look like an executive who was about to terminate a very bad contract. Gregory, my lawyer, walked beside me carrying a heavy leather briefcase. He looked completely relaxed, like a predator who had already cornered its prey and was just waiting for the right moment to strike. When we entered the courtroom, my family was already there. And by family, I mean the entire circus they had assembled for this performance. Wyatt and Caroline were sitting at the plaintiff's table. Caroline was wearing a modest, conservative cardigan, her hair pulled back, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She was playing the role of the heartbroken mother to absolute perfection. Wyatt sat rigidly next to her, wearing a cheap suit, looking stern and deeply wronged. Right behind them in the gallery sat Riley and Carter, holding hands and looking mournful. But the most sickening part was that they had brought an audience. My Uncle Julian, my mother's older brother, was sitting a few rows back, along with a couple of my cousins. They were glaring at me as I walked down the aisle. My parents had brought them here to witness my public humiliation, to watch the judge force the greedy, rebellious daughter to pay her dues. I took my seat next to Gregory. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes focused on the empty judge's bench. The psychological restraint it took to sit in that room, breathing the same air as the people who had stolen my identity and were now trying to bankrupt me, was agonizing. Every survival instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but my logic held me in place. The judge, an older, no-nonsense man, took the bench and called the case. Wyatt's attorney, a sleazy-looking man who clearly hadn't done his homework, stood up and delivered his opening statement. He spun a tragic tale of a loving family betrayed by a spiteful, wealthy daughter. He painted me as a manipulative monster who had promised to help her poor, struggling younger sister buy a home, only to maliciously back out at the final hour, costing my elderly parents their $50,000 life savings. Then came the testimonies. Wyatt took the stand first. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the whole truth, and then proceeded to lie with a terrifying ease. He testified that on the evening of Tuesday, October 12th, I had come over for dinner. He stated under oath that I had looked him in the eye and promised to finance the house. He claimed I had explicitly told him to use my information to get the pre-approval. Caroline took the stand next and echoed the exact same lies, squeezing out real tears as she talked about how much she loved me and how she didn't understand why I was doing this to them. But the absolute peak of the absurdity was when they called Carter to the stand. Carter, the 28-year-old unemployed musician who wanted to live in a $500,000 house on my dime. He swaggered up to the witness box, swore his oath, and looked directly at the judge. He testified that he was present at the dinner on Tuesday, October 12th, at 6 p.m. He claimed he heard me say, clearly and without hesitation, that I was happy to take on the mortgage because Riley deserved a beautiful home. I sat there, listening to this coordinated perjury, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I was watching my family commit multiple federal felonies right in front of a judge. They were so confident in their lies, so secure in their belief that I was too weak to fight back, that they didn't even consider the possibility that I could prove them wrong. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They had no idea I was holding the keys to a bulldozer. Gregory leaned over to me, a tiny, dark smile playing on his lips, and whispered, "They just locked the doors and handed us the gasoline." When it was our turn for cross-examination, Gregory didn't attack immediately. He didn't raise his voice or act outraged by their lies. Instead, he stood up slowly, walked over to the podium, and began to gently, methodically weave the rope that Wyatt was going to hang himself with. He recalled my father to the stand. Wyatt looked smug, clearly thinking he had already won the judge's sympathy. "Mr. Plaintiff," Gregory began, his voice calm and polite. "I want to make sure I have the facts absolutely correct for the court record. You are testifying, under penalty of perjury, that your daughter, Avery, verbally agreed to assume this $480,000 mortgage." "That is correct," Wyatt said firmly. "And you are absolutely certain of the timeline. You testified that this agreement took place at your home, in your dining room, with your wife and your daughter's fiancé present, on Tuesday, October 12th. "Yes," Wyatt answered, puffing out his chest slightly. "We had dinner. It was a family meeting." "And what time did this family meeting take place, sir?" Gregory asked, tilting his head. Wyatt didn't even hesitate. "Avery arrived right around 6 in the evening. We ate, and we had the conversation immediately after." 6 in the evening, Gregory repeated, writing it down on his legal pad. "On Tuesday, October 12th. And you are certain she was physically sitting in your dining room at that exact time?" "I am absolutely certain," Wyatt snapped, sounding annoyed that his word was being questioned. "She was sitting right across from me." Gregory nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir. That is all I need to clarify." Wyatt stepped down, looking confused but triumphant. He walked back to his table and patted Caroline's hand. My Uncle Julian nodded approvingly from the gallery. They thought the cross-examination was weak. They thought Gregory had nothing. Then, Gregory turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense would like to present Exhibit A." Gregory walked over to the clerk and handed over the thick binder we had prepared. He provided copies to the judge and to Wyatt's attorney. The courtroom was silent as the rustling of paper echoed off the high ceilings. "Your Honor," Gregory said, his voice dropping the polite tone and becoming sharp and authoritative. "The plaintiff has just sworn under oath that my client was sitting in his dining room at 6 in the evening on Tuesday, October 12th. The plaintiff's home is located in the suburbs, precisely 50 miles away from my client's corporate office in the city center." Gregory pointed to the first tab in the binder. "Exhibit A is a certified, subpoenaed record from the security system at my client's place of employment. It logs every entry and exit using her personal identification badge. As you can clearly see, on Tuesday, October 12th, my client badged into her office building at 8 in the morning. The final exit badge swipe of the day was recorded at 8:30 at night." Wyatt's attorney frowned, looking down at the paper. Wyatt's smug expression faltered slightly. "Now," Gregory continued, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room, "one might argue that perhaps she left the building without badging out. So, I direct your attention to Exhibit B. This is a time-stamped, itemized receipt from the corporate cafeteria located inside that highly secure building. At exactly 6:15 in the evening, 15 minutes after the plaintiff claims my client was entering into a verbal contract 50 miles away, my client was purchasing a meal. The transaction was paid for using her personal credit card, which we have verified with bank statements in Exhibit C." I watched my mother's face. The color drained from her cheeks so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. She looked at Wyatt, sheer panic flashing in her eyes. "Your Honor," Gregory said, turning to look directly at my parents. "It is a physical, spatial impossibility for my client to have been in the plaintiff's dining room at 6 in the evening. The plaintiffs have just committed coordinated perjury in your courtroom. But unfortunately for them, that is the least of their crimes today." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the documents. Wyatt's attorney leaned over and started aggressively whispering to his client. My Uncle Julian, sitting in the gallery, looked utterly confused, staring at the back of my father's head. The trap had snapped shut, and there was no way out. Gregory did not give them a moment to breathe. While Wyatt's attorney was still scrambling to understand the security logs, Gregory moved in for the absolute kill. He had dismantled the verbal contract lie. Now it was time to expose the massive underlying fraud. "Your Honor," Gregory announced, holding up another folder. "The defense moves to introduce Exhibit D. The plaintiff claims that my client authorized the use of her financial information to secure this mortgage pre-approval. The plaintiff has submitted a credit application bearing what appears to be my client's signature." Gregory walked over to the judge's bench. "We have hired an independent handwriting expert whose sworn affidavit is attached, confirming that the signature on the mortgage documents is a crude forgery. But we don't even need the expert to prove the fraud." Gregory turned to the courtroom, locking eyes with my mother. "The mortgage broker requires a telephone verification process before initiating a hard credit pull. According to the broker's logs, on Wednesday, October 13th, a woman identifying herself as Avery called to authorize the check." Gregory handed a sheet of paper to Wyatt's attorney, who looked like he was about to be physically sick. "The phone number used for this verification was not my client's cell phone. It was a prepaid, untraceable burner phone. However, the phone was purchased 2 days prior at a local electronics store. Exhibit E is the plaintiff's joint credit card statement, which we subpoenaed. It shows a charge for the exact purchase price of that burner phone at that specific store." The silence in the courtroom was so heavy you could choke on it. The judge looked from the credit card statement to my parents. Wyatt was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would shatter. Caroline was trembling visibly, her hands gripped tight around her purse. "To summarize, Your Honor," Gregory said, his voice ringing with cold finality, "the plaintiffs broke into my client's home office under the guise of a family visit. They photographed her Social Security card and tax returns. They forged her signature on federal lending documents. They purchased a burner phone to impersonate her to a financial institution. And when she discovered the fraud and refused to go along with it, they filed a malicious, fabricated lawsuit to extort $500,000 from her, enlisting her sister's fiancé to commit perjury to support their lies." Gregory closed his binder and stepped back. "The defense respectfully requests that this case be dismissed with prejudice, and we ask the court to consider sanctions against the plaintiffs for filing a fraudulent claim." The judge slowly took off his reading glasses. He didn't look at Gregory. He didn't look at me. He locked his eyes onto my parents, and the sheer fury radiating from the bench was terrifying. "Mr. and Mrs. Plaintiff," the judge began, his voice dangerously low. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have presided over complex civil litigation, bitter divorces, and vicious corporate disputes. I have seen the dark side of human nature. But the level of premeditated, malicious manipulation you have displayed against your own daughter is among the most despicable things I have ever witnessed." Wyatt opened his mouth to speak, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "Do not speak," the judge commanded. "You came into my courtroom and swore an oath. You brought a young man in here to swear an oath. And you spun a web of absolute lies, hoping that the emotional pressure of a family dispute would blind this court to your criminal behavior. You did not just file a frivolous lawsuit. You utilized the justice system as a weapon of extortion to cover up your own identity theft." I looked back at the gallery. Riley was crying, but this time, it wasn't for the cameras. She looked terrified. Carter was staring at the floor, realizing he had just committed a felony for a family he wasn't even legally part of yet. My Uncle Julian looked physically ill, staring at my mother with an expression of pure disgust. The facade was entirely destroyed. Everyone in that room now knew exactly who Caroline and Wyatt really were. The judge picked up his gavel. "This case is dismissed with prejudice. You are barred from ever bringing this matter before a civil court again." He paused, his glare piercing through my father. "And I want to make this very clear. I am ordering the court clerk to forward the full transcript of today's proceedings, along with all defense exhibits, to the state prosecutor's office and the Federal Banking Commission. You are incredibly lucky your daughter did not walk into a police station a month ago, but I will not allow this court to ignore federal mortgage fraud." He slammed the gavel down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. It was over. The immediate aftermath of the courtroom slaughter was chaotic. My parents practically bolted from the plaintiff's table, their lawyer refusing to even look at them as he packed his briefcase. I walked out of the double doors with Gregory, feeling a surreal sense of weightlessness. For the first time in 29 years, the crushing burden of my family's expectations was gone. I had not only defended myself, I had permanently dismantled their power over me. But toxic people do not surrender easily. They are like parasites. When you try to remove them, they dig their claws in deeper, desperate to reattach to their host. By the time I got back to my apartment that afternoon, my phone was blowing up. But the tone of the messages had completely changed. The vicious, demanding texts from Caroline were gone. In their place was a frantic, desperate flood of manipulation disguised as love. "Avery, please, you have to call me," the first voicemail from Caroline pleaded, her voice choked with hysterical sobs. "We were just so desperate to help Riley. We made a terrible mistake. We love you so much. Please don't let them send your father to jail. We are family. We can fix this privately. Just call me." Then came the text from Wyatt. "Avery, I am sorry. The lawyer told us to do it. We didn't want to sue you. Please, you have to tell the prosecutor it was a misunderstanding. They're talking about federal charges. You can't do this to your own parents. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were terrified of the consequences. They had spent my entire life using guilt to control me, and even now, facing federal investigation, their only strategy was to try and guilt-trip me into saving them. They wanted me to be the human shield one last time." I didn't reply. I didn't listen to the rest of the voicemails. I forwarded everything to Gregory. I had learned my lesson about giving them the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, Gregory and I filed an emergency petition for a restraining order against Wyatt, Caroline, Riley, and Carter. I sat in a smaller, quieter courtroom and presented the judge with the months of harassing text messages, the smear campaign posts, and the frantic voicemails from the night before. I explained that these people had stolen my identity, sued me fraudulently, and were now attempting to harass me into interfering with a federal investigation. The judge granted the order without hesitation. It was a comprehensive, ironclad mandate of no contact. They were legally forbidden from calling me, texting me, emailing me, or coming within 500 feet of my home or my office. If they tried to use a third party to pass a message, they would be arrested. When the restraining order was served to them later that week, it was the final, definitive cutting of the umbilical cord. I changed my phone number. I locked down all my social media profiles. I informed the security desk at my corporate office to call the police immediately if anyone matching my parents' descriptions tried to enter the building. I built an impenetrable fortress around my life. I spent that weekend sitting on the floor of my living room, looking at the spot where Caroline had deliberately spilled the coffee. I felt a profound, aching grief, not for the family I had lost, but for the family I had never actually had. I grieved for the little girl who thought she could earn her parents' love by being perfect and paying the bills. But beneath the grief, there was a quiet, growing sense of peace. I was no longer the golden child's bank account. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was just Avery, and for the first time, that was enough. The legal boundary was drawn, but the destructive chain reaction my parents had started was out of my hands now. I had stepped off the train tracks just in time, and now all I could do was watch from a safe distance as the train they had hijacked derailed spectacularly. The thing about committing federal mortgage fraud is that banks are significantly less forgiving than family members. When a judge explicitly orders court transcripts detailing identity theft and forged lending documents to be sent to a federal banking commission, the wheels of justice turn with a brutal, mechanical efficiency. Because I had severed all contact, I didn't have to endure the daily chaos of my parents' downfall. I heard the details through the grapevine, specifically from my uncle Julian, who had been completely horrified by what he witnessed in court and had reached out to apologize to me profusely. Within 2 weeks of the dismissed lawsuit, The bank that had issued the pre-approval and processed the initial paperwork realized they were holding a fraudulent file. The $50,000 earnest money deposit my parents had scraped together from their own home equity was frozen by the escrow company pending investigation. The bank immediately halted the closing process on the $480,000 mansion. But it didn't stop at a canceled real estate deal. Agents from the Federal Fraud Division knocked on my parents' door. According to Julian, the facade of a united, loving family disintegrated the second the federal agents started asking questions. When faced with the prospect of prison time for wire fraud and identity theft, the loyalty Wyatt and Caroline claimed to hold so sacred vanished into thin air. Wyatt completely threw Caroline under the bus. He told the investigators that stealing my social security number and using the burner phone was entirely my mother's idea, claiming she was the mastermind and he was just trying to support his wife. Caroline, in return, viciously turned on both Wyatt and Riley. She claimed Wyatt forced her to make the phone call, and she actually tried to blame Riley, telling the agents that Riley had manipulated them into breaking the law because she was so desperate for the house. They were turning on each other like starved animals. The psychological abuse they had inflicted on me for years was now being directed inward. They were spending thousands of dollars they didn't have on separate criminal defense attorneys, draining whatever was left of their retirement savings. And then there was Riley, the golden child who had never faced a consequence in her 26 years of life, was suddenly crashing into the real world at terminal velocity. Riley and Carter had already begun moving some of their belongings into the mansion, using the garage as storage under a temporary pre-closing agreement with the desperate seller. When the bank froze the transaction and flagged the property, the seller's agent immediately served Riley with a notice to vacate the premises and remove her belongings within 48 hours. Riley, living in her own delusional reality, absolutely refused. She genuinely believed that because she was the victim of my refusal to pay, she still had a moral right to the house. She threw a massive tantrum, refusing to move her boxes, claiming the bank was being unfair and that she was going to squat there until someone gave her the deed. That was when the local sheriff's department got involved. They didn't care about her creative vision or her bad energy. They cared about trespassing. The house of cards had completely collapsed, and the people who had built it were currently buried under the rubble, desperately trying to blame anyone but themselves. Riley's eviction was the grand finale of her self-inflicted tragedy, and true to form, she managed to broadcast her own humiliation to the entire world. When the sheriff's deputies arrived at the mansion to enforce the trespassing order, Riley resorted to her only known defense mechanism, playing the victim on the internet. She stood on the front porch of the massive, empty house, holding her phone up to record a live video for her social media followers. She was hysterical, sobbing uncontrollably, mascara running down her face. "I can't believe this is happening," she wailed to the camera, her voice echoing in the quiet, upscale neighborhood. "My own sister destroyed my life, and now the corrupt banks are throwing me out onto the street. Carter and I have nowhere to go. Everything was stolen from us. We are literally homeless because people are so greedy and evil." She panned the camera around to show the beautiful front yard, trying to emphasize what she was losing. But Riley, in her dramatic frenzy, wasn't paying attention to her surroundings. As she moved the phone, the camera clearly captured the bright orange notice taped to the front door by the sheriff's deputies. It wasn't just an eviction notice. It was a formal order of trespass related to a fraudulent real estate transaction. The text on the paper was large enough to be read by anyone watching the video on a decent screen. Within minutes, the comments section, which had previously been full of people supporting her during her initial smear campaign against me, completely turned. People paused the video, read the notice, and realized they were watching a woman throw a tantrum over being kicked out of a house she was trying to acquire through federal fraud. The internet is ruthless, and the backlash was immediate and brutal. People started calling her out, demanding to know why the police were citing fraud. Riley panicked, abruptly ended the live stream, and deactivated all of her social media accounts within the hour. But the internet is forever, and the video had already been saved and shared by dozens of people in our hometown. The public humiliation was the final straw for Carter. Carter was a leech who wanted a comfortable life without working for it. He had been perfectly happy to marry Riley when he thought it meant moving into a $500,000 mansion paid for by his future sister-in-law. But suddenly, the mansion was gone. His future in-laws were facing federal indictments, and his own name was recorded in a court transcript committing perjury. The free ride had turned into a high-speed pursuit. The day after the eviction, Carter packed his guitars and whatever clothes he could fit into his car, and he left. He didn't even say goodbye to Riley in person. He sent her a text message saying the family drama was too toxic for his mental health and he needed space to focus on his music. He abandoned her the second the money dried up. Riley, the golden child who had never been told no, was left with absolutely nothing. No house, no fiancé, no social media followers to validate her, and parents who were too busy trying to stay out of federal prison to bail her out. She had to move back into the cramped spare bedroom of Wyatt and Caroline's house, the very house that was heavily mortgaged to pay for the lost $50,000 deposit. They were all trapped together in a prison of their own making, stewing in their shared toxicity, with no one left to blame and no one left to exploit. While my family was busy imploding, I decided to finish the job they had started. During their smear campaign, they had poisoned the well, telling every aunt, uncle, and cousin that I was a heartless monster. I refused to let that false narrative stand. I didn't want a relationship with most of those relatives, but I demanded the truth be known. I drafted a single, comprehensive email. I attached the certified court transcripts, which included Wyatt's perjured testimony and the judge's ruling. I attached the GPS and security log evidence. I attached the bank records showing the burner phone purchase. And most importantly, I attached the photograph of the forged mortgage application next to a copy of my real signature. I sent it to the entire extended family. I didn't add any emotional commentary. I just wrote, "For those of you who sent me messages condemning my character over the past month, here is the legal and factual reality of what Wyatt and Caroline attempted to do to me. I will not be discussing this further. Please do not contact me again." The silence that followed was deafening. There were no more flying monkeys. A few relatives, the ones who had remained neutral, sent quiet apologies. Uncle Julian called me, his voice thick with shame, apologizing for sitting in that courtroom and doubting me. I accepted his apology, but I kept my distance. The bridge was burned, and I wasn't interested in rebuilding it. But I didn't stop at the family group chat. A friend of mine from college worked as a freelance writer for a mid-level media outlet that focused on bizarre legal disputes and family law nightmares. I reached out to her. I agreed to tell the whole story on the condition of strict anonymity regarding my exact name and the specific city. I handed over the redacted court documents and explained the entire timeline, from the spilled coffee to the burner phone to the courtroom slaughter. She pitched the story, and the editors loved it. They ran it as a massive weekend feature article. The headline was sensational, capturing the absolute insanity of parents suing their daughter for refusing to pay for a fraudulently obtained mansion. The story went viral almost instantly. It was picked up by legal blogs, shared on Reddit forums, and debated on podcasts. Even though the names were changed, the details were too specific for anyone in our hometown to ignore. The local gossip mill caught fire. Neighbors figured it out. Former co-workers figured it out. Wyatt and Caroline became social pariahs in their own community. People would whisper and point when they walked into the grocery store. The shame of being publicly exposed as manipulative, criminal parents was something they couldn't gaslight their way out of. The social pressure, combined with the crushing legal fees from the federal investigation and the massive debt from the lost deposit, finally broke them. 6 months after the lawsuit was dismissed, Wyatt and Caroline put their house on the market. They sold it at a loss, packed up their belongings, and moved to a smaller, cheaper town 2 states away, taking a miserable, defeated Riley with them. They fled the ruins of the life they had destroyed. It has been nearly 2 years since I walked out of that courtroom. The federal investigation ended with Wyatt and Caroline pleading guilty to lesser charges of financial misdemeanor to avoid prison time, but they were hit with massive fines and a permanent stain on their records that ruined their credit forever. They will never own a home again. They will be renting small apartments for the rest of their lives. As for me, I changed jobs. I took a position at a firm in a different city, putting hundreds of miles between myself and the ashes of my past. I bought a small house with a big backyard. I adopted a dog. I started spending my money on things that brought me joy, rather than using it as a shield to deflect my mother's tears. The healing process wasn't linear. There were nights I woke up in a cold sweat, thinking I heard the doorbell ring, terrified a process server was standing there. Therapy helped me untangle the deeply wired belief that my only value was financial. I had to learn how to exist without the constant, heavy gravity of their demands. I learned that love without respect is just manipulation disguised as affection. I learned that sharing DNA does not obligate you to be a casualty in someone else's war. Family is supposed to be a safe harbor, but when the harbor is rigged with explosives, the only logical choice is to sail away and build your own. They thought I would break under the pressure. They banked on the obedience they had spent decades beating into me. But they pushed too far, and instead of breaking, I became the architect of their absolute ruin. They demanded my future to pay for her mistakes, banking on the obedience they beat into me. Did I go too far in letting the federal system destroy them, or was it exactly the reckoning they deserved? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button, leave a like, and let me know your verdict in the comments below. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much.